Developer Diary 239 is out. We have almost managed to complete the game of Stellaris, I assume. There can't be many more Developer Diaries left, right? But anyway, what's going on in today's Developer Diary? Well, there's a big change coming to the POP job system that's going to affect both players and the AI. And then we have a whole host of changes that are coming to the AI to improve the AI. And boy, yes, it's got even scarier again. Finally, I've tacked on at the end of this video a few more comments about Empire Sprawl and the new Empire Sprawl system that they're talking about implementing, so stick around to the end if you want to hear that. Without any further ado, let's dive into the Dev Diary. First, we should note, and this is quite important, some of the changes and screenshots being talked about in this Dev Diary were made long before the beta, but also there are new changes which are not part of the beta, meaning that there are some things we still haven't seen and will be waiting for with the 3.3 release. Today's Dev Diary is written by Ofe, and he's got a really important life lesson he started with here, and that is, as his time developing for Paradox, he's learned that when he would often use phrases like "it's an absolute disaster," he should instead use phrases like "this is pretty good, but it can be even better." That's going to be important later on. Changes to the POP job system. Now this is a very important one because not only is it going to affect the AI, but it is also going to affect us, the players. Well, basically, as some of you may have noticed, sometimes in the game you can get this weird effect where your POPs will yo-yo between two separate jobs on your planets across your empire, and that will cause one deficit to form and then be replaced almost immediately by another deficit. I think the most notable occurrence of this is when you have maintenance drone jobs as a machine empire, and your POPs will yo-yo between filling them all up and then emptying out into another job, and hence causing an amenities deficit, which is a problem, and then they will jump back into that amenities job again, overflowing your planet with amenities, and the circle keeps going. Why is this? What was the old system? How did it work? Well, every time something important happens on one of your planets, such as a new POP growing, a district or building is finished its construction, or an upgrade is finished, every single POP would update their desire, also known as their weight, to work each job. Then all of the POPs would be unassigned from their jobs, and all of them would be put back on potentially new jobs. What are the benefits to this? Well, the benefits are that you don't have to do an update of all the jobs every month. You're only doing an update when you need to make a change because something new has happened. But on the other side, the downside is that if you have scripted conditional job weights, for example, what we talked about earlier was the amenities on a planet, if you have something like that, it can cause mass migration of POPs between jobs when the system eventually does update, because all POPs will move at the same time. How are they changing it in 3.3? Well, during each monthly update, that is the update at the end of the month, they will update all the jobs on all of your planets. And instead of allowing POPs to move between any job they want, they will only remove or add a maximum of one POP per job during this update. Now, before anyone loses their mind, and when I originally read this, I lost my mind a little bit. I thought, wait a minute, how crazy can you be? We already have massive lag problems. Please, 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 God, do not start trying to update every month, every POP on every planet. And Paradox, ironically, they felt the same way. Straight out of the gate here, they said, well, many of you are probably immediately clenching your fist in anger while picturing your poor CPU melting. And as scripted calculations based on number of POPs in Stellaris, well, we all know they can be very, very CPU intensive and CPU demanding. But luckily there is some good news. First of all, in 3.2 there were so many redundant calls to the job weight calculation that by removing them where it was possible, they were already able to reduce the amount of job weight calculations by 75%, which is a phenomenal saving. Furthermore, they're now reusing job weights between POPs that are of the same species and share the same job. Therefore, we have just had another reason why xenophobia And on top of that, obviously there is the late game lag reduction called planet cracking. But basically, this means if you play as a xenophobic empire, you are literally reducing the lag in the game. Xenocompatibility and xenophilic empires, if you get many different pops on your planets, or even many pops of different subspecies, well, that's bad. I'm not sure I can or should say this, but racial purity will improve your CPU performance, which is kind of a crazy message for the game Stellaris to be sending, but I suppose that's just the galaxy we live in. What does this mean? Well, if 40 pops work as miners on the planet and they are all the exact same species, the scripted job weight calculation will only be performed once instead of 40 times as it used to be done in the past. This new system should allow scripted job weight calculation that depends on itself without causing ping-pong behavior as we've seen. This is something that really frustrates newer players in the game, and they cannot understand why their resources are ping-ponging around from positive to negative, and it can be very disruptive. I think it actually causes some people to leave, so getting rid of that behavior is a massive bonus and a massive step forward in my book. Next is something I would think of as being almost a bug fix. This is jobs for your pops. So for AI empires, an AI empire would look at the number of free jobs on a planet when deciding if it needs to build new jobs, build new buildings or districts. So if there were, for example, 3 free jobs, then the AI would clap its hands together and go, well, jobs are good and move on. At the same time, the planet could be having huge numbers of unemployed pops rioting on the streets. And this is, of course, due to slaves or robots, where some pops cannot work specialist or ruler type jobs, meaning there are open jobs which are unavailable to your unemployed pops. So they're changing it around. Instead of looking at the number of jobs on the planet to make sure there are jobs available, they're now going to look at the number of unemployed pops, and the AI will make sure to create a job that the specific pop is actually able to work. For instance, if we have a chattel slave, it's going to make some sort of worker class job for that slave to actually use. This is going to be quite a nice quality of life improvement for the AI. I hope this has some effect on our sector AIs. I hope some of the scripting reaches that point, but we will just have to wait and see. So far, they've only talked about changing the AI and not the sector AIs specifically. And if you're enjoying this video, please commence the like button procedure. AI scaling economic subplans. That's a real mouthful. What does it mean? Well, scaling subplans were mentioned earlier as a planned feature for the future. Well, the future is now, ladies and gentlemen, so strap yourselves in. In 3.2, Paradox got rid of the old economic plans. They went the way of the dodo, and these are the ones that had a predefined early, mid, and late game strategy. Instead, they introduced the shared base plan, which doesn't look at what year it is, but rather looks at what state the empire is in. Now, when Ofe first saw the new economic subplan, he thought to himself, this is pretty good, but it can be even better. And to use the translation above, that means he thought it was an absolute bloody disaster. So how will the system work in 3.3? The base economic plan is now very small. It sets a minimum target for all types of strictly needed resources, such as minerals, energy and food, with about a plus 20 monthly income target. Once these targets are met, then a small amount of consumer goods, alloys and science targets are added. Once all of those above base plans are then satisfied, they enable the scaling subplan, which is just like any other economic plan, except that it will add itself each time it is fulfilled an unlimited amount of times. This means the scaling plan contains a small amount of energy and minerals, but primarily alloys and science. So the more mature the AI economy becomes, the focus moves from base resources over to military and science production, just like a player in the game. Additionally, 3 separate conditional scaling subplans have been added, which enable for materialist, militarist, and total war empires, and spiritualist empires that add additional science, alloy, or unity targets to their economic plan as a first step to making AI economy more distinct from each other. That means materialists are going to be going for science first, militarist for military alloy production, and spiritualist empires will be probably going for more unity. They have done some testing. The Grand Admiral Hivemind, tested out here, reached a monthly income of 3,000 alloys and 22,000 science in a single test run by the year 2422. This is before the Unity rework, but it's very important to note, I don't think I've ever seen an AI reach 3,000 alloys per month or 22,000 science. This is actually scary and quite intimidating. But what about planetary specialisation? For a long time now, it has been quite clear that, well, humans, we're quite good at long-term goals. We can see a planet, we can decide, yes, that planet is going to be a factory world, it's a planet we haven't even colonised yet, and we will work towards the goal of only putting industrial districts there and building up that world into the economic heartland of our empire with regards to consumer goods. So the AI, on the other hand, the AI simply cannot make long-term plans like this. The AI is very good at adapting to the situation and will keep a close eye on what is currently happening and react immediately to any shortages, but will lack some of the long-term planning capabilities that we proper sentients, that is lizards and humans, are able to do. So how can the AI make a specialised world without being able to plan for the future? A very straightforward way of doing this is simple. They are going to make it so the AI will switch the places of districts that we've already built in the past. So if we compare two planets where both of them have 5 mining and 5 energy districts, we can gradually specialize the planets by replacing the districts one pair at a time until we end up with one planet with 10 energy districts and another with 10 mining districts. Now this is actually very reasonable. I would recommend as a human player you do something like this if you've been unable to specialize your worlds from the beginning. This approach works quite well in practice and is very dynamic in the sense that it allows the AI to make hybrid planets in the early game, which then become more specialized over time and thus can use the bonuses from planetary specialization. The next step is to look at alloys versus consumer good production and planetary designation. For non-Hivemind empires, alloy production and science production is a very big challenge for the AI economy. And choosing whether to specialize a world as a forge world or a factory world or just an industrial world is actually very complicated from an AI scripting perspective. And this is something we're going to be working on in the future. The current system is a step in the right direction, but it is a tricky problem that will require a little bit more fine-tuning in the future. Now that we've worked out how the AI should handle its alloys and consumer good production separately, it's time to tackle how the AI will actually spend its alloys. In 3.2, the AI absolutely adored defensive platforms, and keeping them up to date by upgrading them at every possible time. Not only was this a massive drain of alloys, it would also more or less permanently fill the production queue in the shipyards with upgrades, which meant that in some cases it wasn't able to build any new ships even if it wanted to. This is because it was perpetually upgrading its ships and defense platforms. Additionally, there was a bit of a silly issue where the AI would get blocked from building any modules or upgrading any star bases if there was an open module slot in which it wasn't possible to build anything to the AI starbase templates. For example, the AI had dedicated shipyard starbase templates, and if it has open slots in it, then it would really like to build the Titan assembly module. But if it wasn't researched yet, then the AI would simply get blocked and be prevented from construction of new starbases. In 3.3, the new spending priority will go a little something like this. First, the AI will build new ships until it reaches the fleet cap. Then it will build new starbase modules, then it will build new starbases, and then it will upgrade starbases. Finally, it will upgrade ships and defense platforms if and only if that upgrade gives it a plus 30% fleet power bonus, and upgrade the entire fleet this ship is in while we are at a shipyard anyway, saving both alloys and time. Finally, as a last resort, if it has nothing else to spend its alloys on, it will bite the bullet and start building some defensive platforms. AI tech picking was in need of some serious rework. Up until 3.2, the majority of techs had some modifier on it, which increased the chance of that tech being selected by the AI. But when you prioritize everything, basically you're prioritizing nothing. So with 3.3, they've gone back to the drawing board and they have reworked all of the AI priorities from scratch. This means that they are emphasizing techs that will help the AI scale into the mid and late game. For example, resource production boosting techs, pop growth techs, and resource producing building chains are now more encouraged, just like I would be encouraging you as the player. Additionally, the AI will now look more favourably on techs that are cheaper compared to other options. This will allow the AI to more quickly cycle through available options and find techs that it really likes that can really help it. This is all good news. The AI now has the right and the authority to delete buildings and districts that it does not need. This means if a district or building gives superfluous jobs, such that if we were to delete it, we would still have the same number of employed pops and we wouldn't go below the 3 job minimum that it likes to have, then it will go and delete that building to avoid paying the upkeep cost and freeing up the slot for something else in future. This most often happens when the AI invades another planet and purges all of their pops. For example, determined exterminators will now be able to repurpose the conquered planets into something that aligns with their economy. Rogue servitors are getting a bit of a retool. For too long, they have not been moving their pops around to other planets. And what I mean by this is their bio trophies. If you watch a rogue servitor AI, often they will never bother moving their bio trophies off their capital. Now, whenever a rogue servitor upgrades its capital building, it will then build a bio sanctuary, an additional sanctuary on the planet, which will then mean that we will enable migration of pops of their bio trophies from their capital over to these other worlds, finally addressing the problem of not putting bio trophies on every planet, which is something a rogue servitor should definitely be doing. They've also fixed the problem where the AI would not be building some special buildings like Gaia Seeder's spawning pools and Chamber of Elevation. This is another great piece of news. And lastly, there is an AI comparison, first on Ensign mode and then on Grand Admiral. I'm going to show you the images. Basically, Ensign mode, the new version, does a lot better, which is, well, I mean, it's what we were expecting here. It's able to produce a phenomenally larger fleet by 2400, that's 200 years into the game. And when we switch over to Grand Admiral, we've actually got 3 lines here. 3.2, the new AI called Develop, and Develop with Trade Buff. Apparently, the way that Grand Admiral bonus was working, it wasn't correctly giving a trade buff to the AI. When you factor that in, you end up with an AI that has almost double the fleet power of a regular 3.2 Grand Admiral AI. Very, very scary indeed. All of this is definitely moving in the right direction. So, my hat is off to the developers in the Custodian team. Thank you for your hard work. And I'd just like to take a small moment to make another comment about this Empire Sprawl change, the Empire Sprawl update. Now, I think possibly what's going on here is a little similar to what happened in World of Warcraft with the Rested. So originally with the resting system, if you were not rested, you would get a 50% debuff to your experience gain, and players hated it. So instead of that, Blizzard reworked it and they changed it so that if you were rested, you would get a 100% increase to your experience gain, and they halved all of the experience values. This basically meant that it was the exact same system, but nobody was getting a debuff. So from that vein, I think if they reworked it so that your effective research rate was much, much higher if you had no Empire Sprawl, so in a position at the start of the game where you had 0 Sprawl, you had an effective research rate that was higher, and as the game goes on, that effective research rate will go down to 0, but have it reworked so that it seems like it's a buff. Would that be better for you guys? Is that, for those of you that are against Empire Sprawl, would that make it seem better? Let me know in the comments. Maybe that's the way that Paradox should go. So they should stop giving us a nerf from Empire Sprawl being high, but instead give us a buff when it's low. And further to that, there are quite a few comments saying that they hate Empire Sprawl because it is providing a penalty. They don't want a penalty when they expand. It means that there is no point expanding. Well, I have made a video on that. There is always a point to expanding. It is always beneficial to get more stuff, even if you increase your Empire Sprawl. I'll link that down in the description down below. But let me give you an analogy for why I think that point of view doesn't quite work. If you build any buildings in the game, those buildings and districts come with an upkeep cost. They come with a penalty. The effective logic here is that people are ignoring the buffs or the bonuses they get for expanding, for getting more pops, more buildings, more resources, more income of all the types. And that is basically akin to saying, well, I'm not going to build this building or district because it gives me a penalty. And they're completely ignoring the fact that, while yes, it does give you the penalty, it also allows you to have more jobs or get more income, which means overall the net is a positive gain. It is beneficial to build that building. Just a little takeaway, just a few things I wanted to add here. Please let me know what you think in the comments down below. I've been Montu. Thank you for watching.